The sound of my son Rafael pounding on the door echoed through the sweltering midsummer heat like a hammer against my soul. He stood out there screaming, calling me a paranoid old woman simply because I wanted to hold on to the last of my money to pay for my Medicare insurance. It is a bitter thing to realize that the bond of blood can become so thin and cheap in the face of greed. Hello to all my dear listeners who believe that family is everything. My name is Bailey, and I am sitting here today to tell you a story about finding the truth in the middle of a storm. You see, at 60 years old, after my husband passed away, I only wanted a quiet life surrounded by my children and the smell of warm cornbread every weekend. But life is not always the dream we imagine it to be. Before we begin, I want to ask how you all are doing. How is the weather in your part of the world? Down here in Georgia, the sun has already begun to burn hot. Please leave a like or a comment so we can feel connected and know we are not alone on this journey. Now let us go back to the day when everything fell apart. The day a changed credit card password revealed a truth I was not ready to see. I was standing in the checkout line at Target, holding a few educational books for my grandbabies and a bottle of vitamin D for my aching joints. Everything felt like any other Tuesday until the cashier told me my card was declined for being over the limit. My heart suddenly tightened in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out across my palms. I fumbled with my phone, only to see a string of alerts from a high-end boutique that Alana loves. It felt like a heavy fist had just slammed into my ribs, making it hard to breathe in that crowded store. I could not believe the money I had set aside to handle these rising prices, and my Medicare was being thrown away on designer clothes without a second thought. The moment I stepped through my front door, Rafael was already there, waiting in the living room, with his face flushed deep red. He did not ask how I was feeling or even look at the bags in my hands. The first thing out of his mouth was a roar of anger demanding to know why I had changed my credit card password and embarrassed Alana at the shop. Looking at my only son, the boy I raised with so much pride now standing there insulting his own mother for the sake of another woman, made my entire world crumble. A deep numbness washed over me, and I did not even feel the sting of his words anymore, only a hollow emptiness that comes from the ultimate betrayal. After Rafael stormed out and slammed the doors so hard the house shook, I was left alone in a silence that felt heavy and terrifying. I sank into my old recliner and looked up at the photo of my late husband sitting on the mantel. I found myself whispering to the quiet air, asking where I had gone wrong. The memories of the last 2 years began to play back in my mind like a slow and painful movie filled with bitter truths I had tried so hard to ignore. Sitting in the dark room, my mind started tracing back all those loans that never made it back to my purse. It started small with just a few $100s to keep the lights on after a bad storm hit the coast. Then it grew into paying for those big family trips, where I was the main sponsor for everyone just to see them smile. Rafael always knew exactly what to say, telling me that family has to stick together and calling me the greatest grandma in the world. I truly believed my kindness was building a bridge to a future where they would look after me in my older years. Now I see those sweet words were just silk threads in a web meant to drain everything I worked a lifetime to save. I remember how Alana used to drop those little hints about my savings and the house my husband left behind. She acted like it was all family property already hers, by right of inheritance. Whenever I thought about buying myself a new Kindle to read my books, or even a pair of comfortable Skechers to save my aching knees, she would find a way to make me feel guilty for spending money on myself. She made it seem like I was stealing from the grandchildren's future every time I wanted a bit of comfort. My sacrifices became their expectations, and I felt myself shrinking in my own home, losing my voice and my power. That sadness I felt for so long is finally turning into a cold, hard anger. I am realizing that I have to be the one to choose myself because no one else is going to do it for me. I stayed awake that entire night, just staring at the shadows on the ceiling. But my mind was clearer than it has been in years. I have made my choice, and there is no turning back now. Tomorrow, when that Georgia sun comes through the window, a different Bailey is going to wake up. The days of being used and manipulated are over, and a life of my own is finally going to begin. This morning, I woke up and treated myself to a real breakfast. I made thick pancakes and brewed some fresh coffee that filled the whole kitchen with a rich aroma instead of rushing through a meal just to save every penny for the grandkids' toys as I usually did. I put on my favorite outfit from Talbot's and laced up my New Balance sneakers that feel like walking on clouds. As I walked through the park near my house, the breeze on my skin and the sound of birds in the old oak trees made me feel a lightness I have not known in years. I stopped by Barnes and Noble and finally bought myself a new novel and that Kindle Paperwhite I have been wanting for so long. No more squinting at tiny print for me. It was the first taste of true freedom after years of carrying everyone else's weight on my shoulders. After my walk, I took a deep breath and dialed the number of a dear friend from my teaching days. We had not really talked in such a long time because Alana always seemed to find a way to occupy my time. Hearing her laugh on the other end of the line was like medicine for my soul. We made plans to grab lunch at a cozy little spot where we can talk about our future plans, and finally sign up for those gentle yoga classes at the community center we always talked about. I realized then that even if my children turn their backs on me, I still have friends and a community that is ready to welcome me back with open arms. My life still has so much color and purpose left in it. But I knew this quiet peace would not last forever. I know my son, and I know that once the money stops flowing, he will not just walk away. Just as I expected, my phone started buzzing on the table with a text from Rafael. His tone was completely different this time, saying he was sorry for yesterday and asking if we could meet up. The first confrontation is coming, and I have to stay strong and keep my boundaries firm. My dear sisters, have you ever felt that weight lift off your heart when you finally decided to buy something special for yourself after years of sacrifice? Please share with Bailey what your last little treat was, and let me know if the weather is nice enough for a walk where you are. Leave a comment with the word peaceful if you are finding a little joy for yourself today too. Later that afternoon, I was out on the porch tending to my marigolds. The Georgia sun was warm on my neck, but the peace was broken when my phone started ringing. It was Rafael again. This time, his voice did not have that sharp edge from before. Instead, he sounded small and weary, using that low, apologetic tone I had heard 1,000 times whenever he needed a handout. He told me he knew he was wrong, but that he was just so stressed with the rising electric bills and the insurance for the kids being due. He went on about how Alana was inside crying, feeling like she was a burden on the family. I stopped what I was doing and just stood there, feeling the heat of the day but a strange chill in my heart. I knew this script by heart. He was playing the victim, hoping I would feel sorry enough to open that credit card back up for them. Then he started bringing up the old days, talking about when my husband was still here, and we all took that big trip to Disney World. He told me I had always been the most generous soul he knew, and asked if I really wanted to see my own flesh and blood struggle like this. Those words used to be my breaking point. They used to make me reach for my checkbook without a second thought. But this time, I took a long, deep breath and thought about that cold feeling at the Target checkout. I found my voice, and though my hands were shaking slightly, I told him as clearly as I could that while I loved them, I could no longer pay for a lifestyle that I had no control over. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that feels like the air just before a thunderstorm breaks. When he realized the sweet talk was not working, his voice changed in a heartbeat. He started accusing me of changing, calling me selfish and stingy. He even asked if those friends of mine had been whispering in my ear and turning me against my own son. It felt like a physical blow to my face. I have spent my whole life saving from my hard work, even putting off getting a new mattress that would actually support my back, just so I could give them what they wanted. And now, because I was setting a boundary, I was being treated as the problem. I did not raise my voice or try to defend myself. I simply told him that I needed some rest and that we could talk again when he was in a better frame of mind. I hung up the phone before he could say another word that would cut into my spirit. I went into the kitchen and put the kettle on for some tea. My heart was still racing, but under that layer of nerves, I felt a spark of something new, a quiet confidence. I had actually done it. I had said no, and I had not let that old familiar guilt swallow me whole. I looked at the bank statement sitting on the counter, seeing all those charges Alana had made at boutiques I would never dream of walking into. Those numbers did not scare me anymore. I realized that protecting what I worked 40 years for was not being mean. It was about my own dignity and making sure I have enough to care for myself. But deep down, I knew Rafael and Alana were not the type to just walk away and let things be. They had convinced themselves that my hard-earned money was their inheritance in advance. To them, my refusal was a threat to the comfort they felt entitled to. That night, I made sure every window was locked tight, a feeling in my gut telling me this was far from over. And I was right. A few days later, I saw Rafael's car pull into the driveway, but he did not come to the porch to knock like he usually did. I was in the kitchen preparing a pot of chicken stew for my dinner when I heard the unmistakable rattle of the front door handle. Before I could even wipe my hands or call out, Rafael burst into the living room holding that spare key I had given him years ago for emergencies. He was not alone, as Alana followed right behind him with her face painted thick with makeup and her eyes full of a cold and han-hock spite. Without so much as a hello, Rafael slammed a heavy stack of unpaid bills onto my coffee table and demanded to know how I planned to explain them. He shouted that their rent was now past due, all because I had been selfish enough to lock my credit card. The sudden loss of safety in my own home made me shiver with a fear that went straight to my bones as I realized my own son was treating me like an intruder in my own house. That fear quickly turned into a deep and burning rage that I had been holding back for far too long. I looked my son square in his eyes and told him that the card belonged to me, and it was never his or Alana's to use as they pleased. I reminded them that they had managed to blow through over $5,000 in just 2 months on designer clothes and fancy dinners, while I was left struggling to pay for my high blood pressure medicine and watching the prices of my groceries skyrocket. I started listing every single sacrifice I had made for them, from putting off fixing the leak in my roof after the last big storm to draining my retirement savings just to cover their credit card debts. My voice was shaking as I spoke, but it was not because I was weak. It was because the bitter truth was finally being laid out for everyone to see. Alana did not even try to act polite anymore, and her voice turned into a sharp and ugly hiss as she stepped toward me. She asked me what an old woman like me even needed all that money for, and claimed that everything I owned would be theirs soon enough anyway by law. Her words hit me like a physical blow, as she openly admitted they were just sitting around waiting for me to pass away so they could take what was left of my life. Rafael just stood there nodding his head in agreement with his wife's poisonous words instead of standing up for his mother. He called me paranoid and told me I was becoming senile, which felt more painful than any physical bruise could ever be. The argument reached its breaking point when I finally told them both to hand over the keys and get out of my sight. Rafael stepped even closer into my personal space and gave my shoulder a rough shove as he tried to grab my purse off the dining table. That small act of violence was the final straw that snapped something inside of me. I screamed for them to get out of my house right this second, with every bit of strength I had left in my lungs. I pointed my finger toward the front door with my chest heaving, and a sudden heavy silence fell over the room. They clearly did not expect a mother who had always been quiet and come true to ever fight back with so much power. Rafael looked at me with eyes full of pure hatred and told me that if I wanted to live alone with my money, then I would get exactly what I asked for. He told me I would never see my grandchildren again, and he would make sure they forgot my name, and those words felt like a knife being twisted in my heart. They stormed out and slammed the door so hard. The pictures on the wall rattled, leaving me standing alone in the middle of a living room filled with the broken pieces of my family. I sank down to the floor, feeling completely drained and weak, but a new kind of resilience was starting to grow deep inside me. I realized right then that I could never let them use my love for those sweet children as a way to tongtian and rob me of my dignity ever again. I stayed awake for the rest of that night because I knew Rafael's threats were not just empty words. I realized I could no longer just sit by and hope things would get better while they threatened my peace and my home. I sat up in the dark and found my old address book to look for the number of that professional lawyer my friend had recommended to me. I also made a firm decision that the very first thing I would do in the morning was have a locksmith come over to change every single lock on my doors. The feeling of betrayal still cuts deep into my soul, but my survival instincts as a woman who has lived through enough storms are taking over now more than ever. The sound of Rafael's car faded into the distance, but the fear of what they might try next stayed with me like a shadow in the corner. I knew that to protect myself, I had to build a fortress that was not just about new keys, but about a strong legal system to back me up. This was no longer just a private family matter. It had become a fight to keep my mind sharp and my hard-earned life safe from those who wanted to tear it down. Just as the sun started to peek over the horizon, I made my way to the office of Lawyer Davis, who is a powerful Black woman with eyes that have seen it all. I told her the whole story about the credit cards and Rafael's threats, and she did not look surprised one bit. She explained to me that this was a common form of elder financial abuse, and we needed to move fast to stop it. We spent the morning going over my will and that power of attorney I had signed for Rafael years ago, when I did not fully understand the consequences of giving him that kind of power over my life. After the legal work was done, I headed straight to the bank. I closed every single old account that had Rafael's name on it and moved every cent to a brand new bank where he could not touch it. I also made sure they set up alerts so that my phone would buzz for any transaction over $100. Seeing the bank teller treat me with such respect as I took back control of my own life made me feel a sense of calm I had not felt in years. I even signed up for a service to protect my identity just to make sure Alana could not try to open any secret lines of credit in my name. By the time I got home, the locksmith was already parked in my driveway waiting for me. I had him change the deadbolts on the front door, the back door, and even the heavy door leading in from the garage. I spent the extra money to install a Ring security system so I could keep an eye on my front porch right from my phone screen. When that clear picture of my yard popped up on my phone, I felt like I could finally breathe again. To make things even safer, I put up motion sensor lights all around the house because I remembered reading about aging in place and how important it is to keep things well lit at night. Protecting my money and my house was only half the battle because I knew I had to protect my spirit too. I decided right then to cut off every digital link I had with Rafael and Alana. I blocked their phone numbers and I blocked them on Facebook and Instagram so I would not have to see their insults or those staged pictures of my grandkids they used to manipulate me. That silence was a little haunting at first, but after a couple of days, my mind felt so much lighter. I started spending my afternoons back in my garden, pulling weeds, and reading the new novels I had picked up from Barnes and Noble. I also made sure to schedule an appointment with my primary care physician within my Medicare network for a full checkup. I was honest with my doctor about the high stress I had been under lately. She was proud of me for taking charge of my life, and she adjusted my blood pressure medication while reminding me to keep taking my glucosamine for my joints since I was doing so much more walking and gardening. Taking care of my own body made me realize I was not some helpless victim, but a strong woman protecting her own peace. As the day came to an end, I sat in my quiet house, sipping on some herbal tea. Everything was finally in its right place, and my fortress was finished. Even though the pain of my own son betraying me still lingers like a dull ache, I finally have that feeling of safety I have been praying for. I know there is still a long road ahead, and they might try more legal tricks, but at least tonight, I can close my eyes and sleep deeply without worrying about the sound of a key turning in my lock. On a quiet Sunday morning, while I was out front watering my plants, Mary, who has lived across the street from me for years, walked over holding a plate of warm cornbread. She looked at me with those kind eyes of hers and said she had heard the shouting the other day and just wanted to make sure I was okay. That simple act of care nearly brought me to tears because I had been trying so hard to hide the cracks in my family out of shame. But Mary just took my hand and told me not to be ashamed, because we are all mothers, and sometimes our children break our hearts. She made me feel like I was not alone in this fight anymore. We sat together on the porch, and I finally let it all out, telling her every bit of what had been happening with Rafael and Alana. Mary listened without judging me and told me she had seen this same kind of thing happen to other sisters in our church community. She promised to keep a close eye on my house and told me she would be ready to stand as a witness for me if it ever came to that. Then she invited me to go to service with her next Sunday, telling me I needed to be surrounded by people who truly love and respect me. That invitation felt like a warm light cutting through the cold loneliness I had been carrying for so long. Later that afternoon, my old friend from the school district stopped by as well. She brought over some papers about a support group for seniors facing financial and emotional abuse. She told me they offer free counseling and help us understand exactly what our rights are. Looking at these two strong women standing by my side, I realized the incredible power of our community and the sisterhood that carries us through the hard times. The fear that Rafael would cut me off from the world suddenly seemed foolish because I realized I had not lost my family at all. I was just finding a much larger and more honest one. The support from Mary and my friend gave me a whole new kind of energy, and I stopped hiding away inside my house. But just as my spirit was starting to heal, I found something life-changing while I was cleaning out my late husband's old study. It was a shocking truth, a secret that Rafael and Alana had been hiding from me so they could keep draining me until I had nothing left. My dear sisters, have you ever had a neighbor or an old friend reach out and help you when you were at your lowest point? How did it feel to know someone had your back during those hard times? Please share your ally stories with Bailey and leave a comment with the word warm to send some love out to the people who watch over us every day. I was tidying up my late husband's desk looking for some Medicare paperwork when my hand brushed against a thick yellow folder wedged deep in the back of the bottom drawer. When I pulled it out, my breath caught in my throat, and the air in the room suddenly felt very thin. These were not my husband's papers at all, but copies of my own bank statements that had been redirected to Rafael's address without me ever knowing. My heart started thumping against my ribs as I saw copies of checks with my signature forged so perfectly to withdraw large amounts of cash. I saw suspicious transfers happening at 3 in the morning when I was sound asleep in my bed. It hit me like a bucket of ice water that this was not just some impulsive mistake or a one-time thing, but a calculated plan to drain me of everything I owned. Then I found printed emails between Alana and my son discussing how they could stop me from using my own savings for home repairs, or even a little trip to see my sisters. They were absolutely terrified I would spend what they already saw as their legal inheritance. Reading those words where they treated me like nothing more than a living bank meant to be managed and controlled made a cold shiver run down my spine. They talked about me as if I was already gone, as if my life and my choices no longer mattered. This was about more than just the money. It was a complete and total betrayal of the sacred trust between a mother and her child. Every bit of hope I had left that they still had love for me in their hearts just vanished into the stale air of that room. I took a long, deep breath and grabbed my phone with shaking hands to take clear pictures of every single page of that folder. I sent them straight to Lawyer Davis with a short note, telling her that we finally had our secret weapon. A wave of pure disgust washed over me as I realized I had spent my life nurturing and protecting people who were willing to leave me in poverty just to satisfy their own greed and fancy lifestyle. But even with that terrible pain came a strange and absolute clarity I had not felt in years. I no longer had to wonder if I was being too hard on them or if I was being a bad mother. I did not have to feel guilty anymore because the naked truth was finally out in the light, where it could no longer be hidden. That night, I sat in the dark by myself, but my mind was clearer and sharper than it has ever been. I was no longer the poor, deceived mother who was afraid of her own son. I was now the one holding the proof of their fraud. Those forged signatures and those stolen numbers were going to be the voice that spoke for me in a court of law. I realized then that I had to be strong, not just for my own survival, but to protect the dignity and the legacy my husband worked his whole life to build for us. The truth was a heavy and painful thing to carry, but it was the only thing that could finally break the chains of their manipulation and let me walk free. Finding those papers changed the entire landscape of this fight. But the cost of that truth left me feeling completely exhausted in spirit. I needed to find a place to hide away for a moment and gather some strength before the real storm hit. The only place I knew that could give me that kind of peace was the memory of the man who always stood by me and protected me from the world. As the shadows gathered in the corners of my quiet home, I walked slowly toward my husband's worn leather armchair, the place that still carried a faint and comforting scent of cedar wood. I sat down and closed my eyes, letting myself sink deep into the memories of the years we spent building our life together, side by side. In the stillness, I could almost hear his deep and warm voice encouraging me just like he did during the hard times we faced through every economic storm and uncertainty. "Bailey, you are the strongest woman I have ever known," he seemed to whisper in my mind. His lessons about integrity and holding one's head high acted like a soft candle lighting up the parts of my soul that felt so worn down by the recent betrayals. I remembered the days when the two of us saved every single penny from our long and hard hours of work just to buy this house and secure a future for Rafael. We gave everything out of pure love, never dreaming that our legacy would one day be treated with such disrespect and greed by the very child we loved the most. A single tear rolled down my cheek, but it was not a tear of weakness. It was a tear of deep nostalgia and gratitude for what we had. I felt the immense love from my late husband wrapping around me like a warm quilt, giving me the courage I needed to protect what we spent a lifetime creating. When I finally stood up from that old chair, I realized that I was not alone anymore. The memory of him and the strength of my roots had become a shield that no one could break. I looked at our family photo on the mantle where we were all smiling, and I made a quiet promise that I would not let any dirty tricks or lies stain the honor of the Frederick name. A deep sense of peace returned to my heart, bringing with it a determination that could not be shaken. I was finally ready to face whatever storm Rafael and Alana were planning to bring to my door next. The strength I gathered from the past helped me start to heal, but those who wanted to drain me were not finished yet. They were about to launch a cruel attack that went straight for my mind and my dignity. The sound of a sharp and cold knock on my door the next morning told me that a stranger was here, and an unwanted confrontation with the authorities was about to begin. My dear sisters, have you ever felt the presence of a loved one who has passed away just when you needed strength the most? How did their memory help you stand tall when the world tried to push you down? Please share your stories of strength with Bailey and let us honor the legacies we carry together. Leave a comment with the word peaceful if you have found strength in your memories today. A caseworker from Adult Protective Services appeared on my porch with a face as stiff as a board and an expression that made my stomach drop into my shoes. She stood there under the morning sun, informing me that a report had been filed, claiming I was no longer of sound mind and was unable to care for myself. The feeling of having my private life pried open and being labeled as senile felt like the deepest insult a woman could ever endure. I knew exactly whose hand was behind this, and it was the low blow Rafael and Alana had threatened me with, using the law to strip away my right to choose how I live. Even as the anger began to boil inside me, I kept my back straight and my voice steady, inviting the woman into my home with all the dignity my mother had raised me with. The interview inside my living room was thick with a pressure that made it hard to catch my breath. The caseworker started digging into everything from how I manage my money to what I eat for breakfast and whether I can still remember the day of the week. I felt like I was being pushed into a corner by lies told by my own flesh and blood. But thanks to the long hours I had spent preparing with Lawyer Davis, I did not let myself falter or trip over my words. I calmly pulled out my medical records from my primary care physician within the Medicare network, showing that my health was stable and my mind was as sharp as a tack. I could feel that initial sense of helplessness starting to turn into a rock-solid strength that they could not break. Things became even more intense when she asked me to explain the large withdrawals on my bank statements that had been flagged. Instead of getting flustered, I laid out the evidence we had gathered, showing how these accounts had been accessed by a third party and that a legal investigation was already underway. I even had the courage to tell her how Rafael had intentionally moved my walking cane and my reading glasses out of reach before just to make it look like I was struggling with my mobility and my memory. The look in the caseworker's eyes began to shift from one of suspicion to one of genuine understanding as she saw how organized and logical my explanations were. Rafael had gone as far as trying to set up a mental health evaluation with a doctor I suspected he had already influenced with his lies. I looked that caseworker in the eye and told her I would not be seeing that man, but I would gladly go to any independent doctor within my trusted insurance network for a full exam. That firm stand I took seemed to put a sudden halt to their entire plan. I walked her through my home, showing her how clean everything was, and pointing out the new Ring security cameras I had installed for my own protection. I even showed her the daily supplements I take like calcium and vitamin D to keep my bones strong as I age in place. I was proving to her that I was not just hanging on, but that I was actively in charge of every part of my life. By the time we were finished, the caseworker had to admit that there was absolutely no evidence that I needed a legal guardian to step in. Winning that battle of wits gave me a surge of confidence that I had not felt since this whole nightmare began. I had exposed their lies to a public official and stood my ground. I knew deep down that this was only the first chapter of a much bigger fight in a courtroom, once the official papers were served, but the fear that used to keep me up at night was gone. It had been replaced by a spirit that was ready to go to war for justice. Once the door closed behind her, I sat down and finally let out the breath I had been holding for so long. I had defended my honor against the most cruel attack a child could launch against a parent. I realized in that quiet moment that being of sound mind is not just about remembering dates, but about having the heart to stand up for the truth. I picked up the phone to tell Mary the good news, and she celebrated with me by saying a short and powerful prayer over the line. I knew then that with the truth on my side and good people standing with me, I was never going to fall. Passing that test of my sanity was a major victory, but the legal pressure was just getting started. The court summons was already sitting there on my table, and I knew I had to spend the evening going over every detail with my lawyer one last time. The final confrontation in the halls of justice was coming closer with every tick of the clock. My dear sisters, have you ever felt insulted when someone questioned your ability to make your own decisions just because of the years on your face? What did you do to show the world that you are still strong and in full control of your life? Please share your stories of resilience with Bailey so we can all learn from one another. And don't forget to leave a comment with the word sharp to remind ourselves of the value we carry every single day. The day the official legal papers arrived from Rafael's lawyer, the air inside my house felt thick and heavy, like the humidity before a Georgia thunderstorm. They were asking the court to declare me incompetent and unable to manage my own life, just so they could seize control of my property and this home I have worked so hard to keep. A sharp anxiety started to crawl into my mind as I thought about having to stand in front of strangers and air out my private family business in a public room. But then I took a long, slow breath and looked over the list of financial safety steps I had already taken with Lawyer Davis. I had canceled the old power of attorney documents and moved my assets to a brand new secure account where they could not be touched. My heart began to settle as I realized I was as prepared as any woman could possibly be. Rafael tried to push a last-minute settlement offer through his lawyer, promising to drop the whole lawsuit if I only agreed to give them a fixed monthly allowance of $1,500 from my hard-earned retirement check. Lawyer Davis just looked at me quietly, waiting for my decision. I did not have to think about it for even a single second. This was never just about the money. It was about my respect and my basic right to make my own choices. Accepting that deal would have been no different than admitting their insults and their manipulation were right all along. I told them no, and I told them clearly that I was not interested in any compromise that took away my dignity or my independence. We spent the entire afternoon going over my secret weapon, which was that folder full of proof regarding the forged signatures and those sneaky transactions I had uncovered in the dark. We organized every piece of evidence until the logic was as clear and sharp as a diamond. I felt a powerful readiness spreading through my chest, and a strength I did not know I had left in me. There was no more room for second-guessing or fear because I knew this trial was finally going to be the end of a long and painful string of lies and injustice. I walked out of that lawyer's office with my chin up, ready to face the day of judgment. The night before the trial, I laid out my best Sunday church outfit, which was a deep navy blue suit that always made me feel put together and respected. I could not sleep much, but it was not because of fear. This time, it was because I was so hungry for justice to finally be served. I double-checked my purse, making sure I had my blood pressure medication and my reading glasses, so I could see every word on those legal documents with absolute clarity. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered to the woman staring back that tomorrow the truth was finally going to win the day. The silence of the house that night felt full of a heavy weight as I waited for the sun to rise. When the morning finally came, I walked into that courthouse with Lawyer Davis on one side and my friend Mary on the other. I knew there would be angry looks and false testimonies waiting for me in that room, but I was standing on a foundation of truth that no one could ever shake. The courtroom was filled with a formal and chilling quiet that made the air feel thin. I sat there at the plaintiff's table, my heart thumping hard against my chest like a trapped bird, as I watched Rafael and Alana walk through the doors wearing masks of fake confidence. Their lawyer stood up and started painting a terrible and dishonest picture of my life. He spoke to the judge as if I were a confused old woman who was slowly losing her grip on reality and being easily manipulated by outside voices. They even had the nerve to present a pile of receipts from their own shopping sprees and claim that I had simply forgotten that I gave those luxury items to them as gifts for the grandkids. My nerves were humming at a high and anxious pitch, but I kept my face as still as a statue, just like Lawyer Davis had coached me to do. Then it was time for Lawyer Davis to step into the light, and she did so with a sharpness that cut right through their narrative. She laid out the bank statements on the table for the judge to see and showed that transactions were happening at 2 different stores at the exact same time miles apart. It was undeniable proof that 2 different cards were being used simultaneously and that one of them had never been in my hand. The atmosphere in the courtroom suddenly became very heavy and uncomfortable for Rafael and his wife. I saw Alana start to fidget in her seat, her fingers picking nervously at the expensive designer handbag she had bought with my stolen money. The real turning point of the trial came when Davis brought out our secret weapon, which was the folder of bank copies and checks with those forged signatures I had uncovered in the dark. She called a professional handwriting expert to the stand who confirmed right then and there that those were not my signatures on those documents. A profound silence fell over the room as the weight of the truth finally landed. I watched Rafael's face drain of all its color, turning from arrogant to terrified and full of shame as he realized his schemes were being exposed to the world. A small spark of deep satisfaction began to grow in my heart as I watched the scales of justice finally start to tilt in my direction. The judge looked over at me and asked me to tell my side of the story in my own words. I stood up tall, took a long, deep breath, and spoke with every bit of dignity I had left in my soul. I told the court about my 40 years of hard work and sacrificed the love I had poured into my family, and the soul-crushing pain of finding out my own son was trying to strip away my legacy while I was still standing there. I looked Rafael straight in his eyes and told the room that while money could eventually be replaced, the truth and a person's dignity could never be bought or sold. My words felt like they had real weight, and they seemed to settle deep into the heart of the courtroom. The judge finally reached for her gavel, and the sound of it hitting the wood echoed like a sudden thunderclap. She completely threw out their request for guardianship and stated there was no evidence whatsoever that I was unable to handle my own affairs. She ordered Rafael and Alana to pay back every single cent they had taken from me without my permission. But the thing that stayed with me most was the way she looked at them and gave them a stern and public reprimand for their hypocrisy and for abusing the sacred trust of an elder who had given them everything. When the final words of the judgment were spoken, I felt a massive wave of relief wash over my body like a cool rain after a long and bitter drought. I walked out of that courthouse and into the bright Georgia sun, feeling like a woman who had been born again. Rafael tried to hurry toward me with a weak and hollow apology on his lips, probably just trying to avoid the legal consequences that were still heading his way. I just looked at him with a calm and quiet peace and kept on walking toward my own future. I am no longer a victim being moved around by someone else's greed. Justice has finally been served, and for the first time in a very long time, I can say that my life truly belongs to me again. The pain might still be there in the corners of my heart, but it no longer has the power to keep me from my peace. Victory in that courtroom was a massive milestone for me, but it was only the beginning of a whole new chapter. I realized I needed a fresh start far away from the heavy memories of that old house to truly enjoy the freedom I had fought so hard to win. A whole new world of travel and quiet joy is waiting for me just over the horizon. A full year has passed since that gavel finally fell, and I have since sold the old house that held far too many heavy and painful memories. I moved south to a bright and comfortable little apartment right near the Florida coast, where the air is sweet and the community is full of life. Now, every single morning, I wake up to the gentle sound of the waves, and I spend my quiet hours tending to my small flower garden or picking up the knitting needles I had put away years ago. I even just booked myself a cabin on a luxury senior cruise heading through the Caribbean, which is a dream I used to think was impossible because I was too busy saving every penny for people who did not respect me. I have finally come to understand that loving your family with all your heart does not mean you have to let them trample on your dignity or your hard-earned security. To all my dear sisters, my mothers and my grandmothers listening to my voice, I want to tell you to never be afraid to stand up and protect your own peace. Being a woman of sacrifice is a noble thing, but that sacrifice must always be met with the respect you deserve. Our true worth in this world is not measured by the size of the inheritance we leave behind, but by the resilience and the character we show as we walk our path. I have found a sense of fulfillment that has nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with finding the woman I was always meant to be. Please remember that no matter how many years are behind you, you still deserve to live a life that is free, happy, and full of pride. I wish each of you a steady heart and a peaceful journey on your own road ahead. Thank you for sharing this time with me. It means so much to have you here. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with a sister who needs to hear it. We are never alone when we stand together. Stay strong, keep your light shining, and stay blessed until next time.